Joining me now is Congressman Curt Weldon, someone I have wanted to interview for years. I've heard so many wonderful things about him from my friend and his friend, the late Dr. Peter Vincent Pry, who used to sit at this very news desk. You know, I tell you that often, but I'm proud of that fact because he was a former CIA analyst. He also worked on Capitol Hill with Congressman Weldon. You're going to hear about that. He was a brilliant man, probably one of the smartest men I ever knew, and he was a good friend. And I'm sad to say he passed away a few years ago, as you guys all remember. But he would fly in here, and we would produce his TV show. I also was privileged to produce his weekly radio broadcast as well. He was a man that was way ahead of the curve, and I miss him so often because we could, well, benefit from his wisdom on world events and history and national security. He taught me a lot, and that is where I continued to hear the name over and over of Curt Weldon, a man who, well, stepped out ahead of the pack and started saying things that the Uniparty maybe didn't want to hear. And of course, they came after him. It's a story, and it should be a movie, frankly. He has been getting a lot of attention lately. He was recently on with Tucker Carlson. He's been on many other programs, and we're honored to have him with us tonight on Brannon Howse Live here on Worldview 2. Congressman, thank you for being with us tonight from your home there in Pennsylvania.
Brannon, it's great to be with you. I apologize for the lack of a studio, but it was a busy day in Washington. I'm back in Pennsylvania now, and I'm honored to be with you because Peter Pry, as you know, was my staffer on the Armed Services Committee and my right-hand person. Everything that I did with Peter, including co-authoring 2 books. And the EMP Commission, all the work against Russia. And because he was a Soviet-Russian expert in the CIA and published a number of writings and books, he was a guy I could always count on to put me on the cutting edge of what the emerging threats were. So it's an honor to be back with you, and thank you for continuing the tradition of Dr. Pry.
Well, thank you. And again, what a high level of compliments he paid often to you in our private conversations, as well as on the broadcast. You know, I guess one of the things he brought to me right away about you was that you were warning, along with Congressman Dan Burton, about these nuclear suitcases. We've played this video clip many, many times. And I guess if you go to the Spy Museum there in D.C., it's on display what we're about to see, and that you guys showed to your colleagues in a congressional hearing. I guess that was put together by Dr. Pry, correct? Mocked up by Dr. Pry?
Yes, I had been involved in my undergrad degree is in Russian studies. So back before I was in Congress, I was sent over as a delegate with 10 leaders, emerging leaders, 5 from each party that might one day be in Congress to debate young communists. That was in 1985. And so I started my work in 85 with people like Bruce Weinrod and debating young communist leaders who actually today are really in leadership positions in Russia, like Valentina Matvienko, who's the top woman in Russia today. And from that position of debating the future leaders of Russia, who back then were in the Komsomol, I got to understand the emerging threats that we had to deal with when the Soviet Union broke apart under Gorbachev. And my goal was to be their toughest critic, but also to find ways to work together to build a common understanding based upon Reagan's principles of peace through strength, which were my guiding principles in my first years in Congress.
And so let me go to a little clip just to set the table for those who are new. Take a look at this. This is, again, Congressman Curt Weldon and Congressman at the time, Dan Burton. Watch this.
They'll get a chance to see this. What a potential nuclear device looks like in a little suitcase like this.
Well, this is basically a briefcase, and it's fairly simple. And the design again.
Can you focus on this, guys?
The design again was taken from the website of the Department of Energy, and basically it's a gun-fueled artillery device where you have to have at a power source, which would be a battery, an arming mechanism, an ordinary switch. You've got to have an ability to have a neutron generator, which are tubes that you can get from that used to be in all of our old TV sets. And when you arm the mechanism, you cause a high explosive to force the device inside of this gun to smash into the critical material, which is the weapons-grade plutonium. That causes the nuclear reaction that causes the explosion. It's a very simple way to design a low-yield nuclear weapon that would probably be 1 kiloton or less.
Okay, now let's go through what that would do again.
It would devastate downtown Indianapolis.
It's about 1/15 or the size of the Hiroshima bomb.
Yes.
And it would blow up 8 square blocks probably.
Yep, kill everyone in that area.
And kill almost everyone in that area. And so if one went off around the Capitol, it would destroy all of our the Senate office buildings,
Yes,
our
everything.
office buildings, the Capitol, and probably kill all of us.
Yep.
And
Vaporize us all.
and then the radiation would be up in the air.
It would cause mass hysteria.
And it would cause mass hysteria and kill as many as a couple 100,000 people.
Absolutely. Now,
And that's just from a little bitty suitcase like this or briefcase like this.
This is an actual, what we call small atomic demolition munition that both our military and the Soviet military built. We built these also during the Cold War to be used at strategic sites. But ours have basically all been removed from the inventory.
And they've been accounted for.
And the Russians know that.
But there's about 80 that are not accounted for. Now,
according to General Levitt, but then you have the potential, which is far easier than this, of taking a conventional weapon and surrounding it with nuclear waste. Now, that wouldn't cause the devastation of a small nuclear device, but psychologically, it would convince everyone in the area that they had been.
Okay, well, let's talk.
Wow. Let's pick it up right there. That's, mid-90s? What was that, you think? Mid-1990s, early 2000s? When did you do that?
Yeah, it was in the 90s. What happened early on in my travels as the Soviet Union broke apart, I met one of the top environmentalists in Russia named Alexei Yablokov. Dr. Yablokov was the chairman of the Yablokov Commission. And when Yeltsin went into power, to help him unify sources, including the Green Movement, he allowed Yablokov to come out and publicly talk about all the inefficiencies in the Soviet Union, one of which was their lack of control of their nuclear material. And I became good friends with Yablokov. I hosted him frequently in the U.S. I became involved with an international program called Advisory Council on Protecting the Seas, because the Soviets had been dumping their nuclear waste in the seas off of Russia, the Barents Sea and the seas up in the area of Nova Scotia, the Scandinavian countries. And so Dr. Yablokov constantly warned me. He said, "Congressman, you've got to get out our leadership because they're not being honest and candid with you." So that's when I started to get into the whole issue of, well, what is a small atomic demolition munition? And I realized with Peter's help, because Peter had been an expert in the CIA on the Soviet Union, that both the U.S. and Russia built them, and that we had accounted for ours, but the Soviets had not. So that became a key priority for me to pursue aggressively. And I can tell you, I wasn't getting full cooperation from our intelligence services. They didn't want me to know about these weapons, and that led to some other things that we can talk about, like when the top KGB archivist actually left Russia and wanted to emigrate to the U.S., and our embassy in London turned him down. Instead, he went to the Brits, and the Brits brought him in, and he told all the secrets that the KGB had about us, one of which was placing strategic weapons in the U.S. and Europe. And I was very upset over that, and I had Peter Pry investigate this, and that led to hearings as we realized that our government didn't want to embarrass Yeltsin. We were so enamored to keep Yeltsin in power, and I can get into why that was the case, but we, in fact, ignored the actual threats that were there and threats that were emerging. That Soviet former head of the KGB archives, who went to London, actually wrote a book, and the book was called The Sword and the Shield, The Secret Files of Matrokin. And that book was published by Dr. Christopher Andrews, who was a top scholar in London. And Peter Pry, at my request, brought Dr. Andrew over to Washington, and I chaired a hearing in Washington in the mid-1990s with Dr. Christopher Andrew and with two former Russian spies, Stanislav Lunev and Matrokin, and they actually testified. And it embarrassed our government that here I was in Congress raising these concerns that should have been raised by the administration. But at that time, the Clinton administration was more concerned with finding ways to, in my opinion, use Yeltsin and create new ways to take some of their wealth, their sovereign wealth, their energy resources and other things, as opposed to getting answers to these strategic security problems that we knew they had. And we were very concerned that the strategic small atomic demolitions, or loose nukes, would get in the hands of terrorists. That's still a concern of mine today. And to be honest with you, my major concern with Ukraine is that one of these devices, if it were taken into Kiev or into one of Ukraine's cities or some other city, and if we push this to a confrontation, could be remotely activated, because you wouldn't see a trail like you would a missile. And that activation, in the case of Kiev, would kill practically everyone in the city. That's a concern I have to this day.
Wow. I'm sure you maybe read some of the books by the author, that The Sum of All Fears, and the movie, the book, Tom Clancy, right? Tom Clancy did these books and these movies, and I think he even got a knock on his door at one point, like, where are you getting all this information? It sounds too credible to what we're doing. Who's leaking to you? I watched Sum of All Fears, and I played 2 clips from that movie a couple weeks ago. And I played it because I'm like, did Tom Clancy see a conflict coming into the future when he did this book and movie? And you got these neo-Nazis. You got a guy that's speaking in the film, and I showed the clip, and he's speaking, and they pan down to his watch, and he's got a swastika on his watch, the back of his watch, that's sitting on the podium. And then the next speech you have is this neo-Nazi saying, what we need to do is get Russia and America to fight each other. We don't need to fight them. We get them to fight each other and take each other out. And then what they do is they bring in a nuclear weapon. As the movie shows, they bring it into, I think, Baltimore, and in a vending machine, right? And this movie, Sum of All Fears, by Tom Clancy. And I watched it. I thought, this is from, I think, the 1990s. Here we have, some of these same characters and ideas, and globalists, fascists, neo-Nazis, whatever you want to call them. And they want to see America and Russia go at it, right? And they want to bring down America. They want to bring down Russia. I think they want to put in people they want in power that will go into their New World Order, or whatever they want to call it. Not people like President Trump, nationalists, opposing globalism. Putin is not interested in LGBT and all this. I'm not an apologist for Putin, but I know he's not interested in maybe conforming to their ideas of green energy and everything else. And I wonder how do you think someone like Tom Clancy was seeing into the future, and how you could get these 2 groups to fight each other and then set up a false flag, maybe bring something in and then blame it on Putin, so we go to war, or do something in America to blame it on a side, so all of a sudden we're off to the races with a war? Are you concerned about a false flag like this?
Well, I think you just had common sense. I mean, I saw the same thing. Again, my whole decision to go into federal politics was based on my support for Ronald Reagan, peace through strength. And it was Ronald Reagan who brought the Soviet Union to its knees, but who eventually got Gorbachev to give up its nuclear program and dismantle the Soviet Union. And as you know, we were the ones that convinced Ukraine to give up its nukes. And with all the debate over Ukraine today, we were the ones, the U.S., that mandated that Ukraine no longer have nukes. They had nukes, and we forced them to give them up. And we and the Russians basically said we will not allow a war to occur. In my opinion, over the past 30 years, and I witnessed most of it, a lot of our actions pushed Putin, after Yeltsin, into a position of being an enemy that could very well lead to a conflict. In my opinion, Yeltsin, and no one in the Congress worked closer with the Russians than I did. I was the one that formed the Duma Congress group. Steny Hoyer was my co-chair. I had about 100 members of Congress in it. I also formed the Rada Congress group with Ukraine. And between those 2 groups, I traveled to the former Soviet states, Russia and the other republics, and Ukraine probably 50 times. All of our sessions were peaceful. All of our discussions were cooperative. There was never talk among any of us at the level of the Congress and the parliaments of conflict. There were disagreements, of course, but we were able to work them out. It was never an agreement leading to a war. What happened, in my opinion, in the 90s, when Yeltsin was in, we saw a chance, not we, certain leaders in America saw a chance to get access to resources in Russia that could be used for personal benefit. And that led to the U.S., certain leaders, not the country, taking advantage of Russia's raw materials, their energy, and using them for their own benefit. We can all talk about the deals that were cut. That's all history. But as opposed to building a stable relationship, which is what Ronald Reagan called for. I remember well that last speech that he gave as he walked through Red Square with Gorbachev, and he said, "We've been enemies for 50 years. Now it's time for us to try to find a way to work together." And I believe that as a philosophy, and so I did everything I could to help make that happen. But my frustration was often with not with the members of Congress, because the members of Congress were all together in a very bipartisan way. It was the different behind the scenes leaders, some of them called the neocons. The people had a different philosophy, and that philosophy was to build antagonism, to not address the realism of what was occurring. In fact, when Donald Trump was elected the first time, I wrote an article, "How do we get here?" And I documented all the cases where the U.S. witnessed actions by Yeltsin that should have required us to take things, like when Galina Stanovoitova was murdered in Leningrad. She was a progressive looking to bring us together, and she was murdered by the people around Yeltsin. The same thing with Lev Brooklyn. He was murdered in Moscow. We had Americans, the top scientists, that were harassed because they were being honest with us about the emerging threats that were occurring in Russia that our intelligence agency didn't want brought forward because they didn't want that narrative out. We caused a lot of that when we should have been working on transparency, and that transparency included the Russian construction and placement of their small atomic munitions and also their small suitcase biological weapons. I had Peter Pry, besides making the suitcase nuke that you talk about, Peter also made for me a suitcase spray device that I demonstrated, and it's in my archives right now, that had basically a paint sprayer. And you could take it on a subway and put a chemical agent in there and set it off, and you could cause a chemical attack in a subway system. And those kinds of issues were the emerging threats that I saw in the 90s that we had to be focusing on. And to be honest with you, I did not feel that we were getting the support from our intelligence agency and even from the State Department to confront those while trying to build a stable relationship with Russia, which we just didn't do. And Yeltsin stayed in. When Yeltsin had become a corrupt drunk after the end of his first term, his popularity dropped to about 20%. I would encourage my friends who think that Hillary Clinton is some kind of a saint and listen to her talk about Donald Trump and Russia, get a copy of the July 1995 or 96 Time magazine. And if they want a copy, I'll send a copy to you and you can give it to them. The front cover of Time magazine has a picture of Boris Yeltsin. And the bottom of that Time magazine story says, Bill Clinton's secret plan to reelect Boris Yeltsin. We sent people over to the presidential hotel in Moscow. The U.S. ran Yeltsin's reelection campaign. We ran it. That was Bill Clinton. And the Time magazine did an extensive, in-depth analysis of that through sources they had. And that was in the 90s, so that we could keep a president in power that we could use for our own benefits. And the Russian people knew that. They knew that America was the one that was actually helping Yeltsin and get reelected. And so for the last 4 years of his tenure in office, when the Duma, half of the Duma didn't want Yeltsin in power, we were still supporting him. And time and again, there were situations where, in one case, the Duma asked Sonny and I to investigate U.S. involvement in stealing money from Russia. We did. That investigation resulted in one of the New York banks being indicted for $5 billion theft. I happen to know it was much bigger than that. And that was downplayed, but that was done at a time when we were supposedly building a stable relationship with Russia. All of that now has come back to haunt us. As Putin came in and he tried to establish this new relationship, and I'm certainly not an apologist for him and what he's done in Ukraine, where I have very dear friends, but we made much of this happen. And I agree with Donald Trump. The Ukraine-Russia war was caused by the U.S.
How concerned are you about those devices, whether biological or nuclear, these devices that you talked about that Peter Pry mocked up for you? How concerned are you with those being here or used in the United States? And by what actors do you think they would be prone to being used by?
Well, I'm very concerned. I was back when I was in Congress, and I expressed that concern both as the vice chairman of the Defense Committee and vice chairman of Homeland Security. And I asked Dan Burton, who was chairman of the Government Oversight Committee, to hold hearings with me, which is why he got involved. And I still feel that we did not do a thorough, adequate job of holding the former Russian and Soviet officials accountable for where those devices were. We didn't want to hear those stories. We didn't want to create that narrative under Yeltsin when we should have been, the key with Reagan was strength, consistency, and candor. And with the Soviets, as they transcended to an independent republic nation, we had to hold them accountable. That's transparency. And that's what Reagan said. We did not do that. We propped Yeltsin up when there were things happening that we were doing or knew about, and we didn't want to talk about them. In fact, some of our own people were harmed. Jack Daly was a Navy commander who was lasered in the eyes flying a helicopter over Puget Sound by a Russian trawler. He was lasered. The State Department hid the memo that was sent over to our embassy. Don't raise this issue. Keep it quiet. Meanwhile, Jack Daly was lasered in the eye. I went to the wall and defended him. I mean, I could give you a story after story where we played games with American lives and American people because we were playing a double game with Russia and the leaders that we wanted in power who were supplying us with money and other assets for certain people that were benefiting. I mean, it's no secret that Bill Clinton would be paid $500,000 every time the mayor of Moscow's wife, Lushkov, wanted him to speak. $500,000 for a speaking appearance. It's common knowledge that Hillary Clinton arranged and approved the nuclear deal with Russia. Those are things the U.S. did. And yet those things never get talked about. Rather, we let Hillary Clinton come out with a bunch of, in my opinion, scumbag intelligence officers who Trump has now taken away their clearances, who maintain that Donald Trump was involved with some kind of a Russian conspiracy, which we now know was a total lie and a fabrication. That's got to stop. And that's what put us in the situation we're in today. We made this happen. We caused this to occur.
Do you believe that President Trump and his team can de-escalate this? Or do you believe that NATO and Emmanuel Macron and these other guys that keep talking the way they are and talk about putting in troops and more troops and keeping this going, do you think it can be de-escalated? Do you think they can get a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia? Or do you think we're headed toward an inevitable conflict?
It's going to be extremely difficult right now. I mean, and again, Putin is what he is. And today he has committed war crimes. As a devout friend of Ukraine who's been there many times and have many and worked closely with the Ukrainian diaspora, what's occurred with the Ukrainian people is a nightmare. But again, we made this happen. Let me give you a couple of examples that have never been talked about publicly. Before Putin went into office in 2000, when he was ordained as the new leader of Russia, the first thing that was required before Putin could take office, Yeltsin made him sign a presidential decree that his daughter Tatiana could never be indicted. Tatiana Daichenko is the biggest crook in Russia. They try to blame that on Trump. It had nothing to do with Trump, but she's still in power today and still making money, and they can't do anything about it over there because we allowed that to happen. So Putin coming in, he's a former spy, so he wanted to reach out to Bush. And I know that because the Republican convention in 2000 was in Philadelphia. So as Steny Hoyer and I were co-chairing the Duma Congress, I got a call from the director of our counterpart on the Russian side. His name was Sergei Gryzlov, and he said, Curt, he said, Putin wants me to come to the Republican convention. I said, for what? He said he wants to show that he wants to reach out to what he thinks will be the new president. So the convention was in Philadelphia. So Gryzlov and a team of Russian leaders, Misha Margilov from the Federation Council, the Senate, and several others came to the Republican convention with a film crew from Moscow, and every day they filmed back to Moscow about Putin seeking this new relationship with President Bush. I saw that firsthand. I witnessed it. I have photographs of Putin's leaders in the Republican convention reaching out. Bush wins the election and after the nomination, and Gryzlov comes to the inauguration. So Bush comes out with his famous speech after he wins, and he says about Putin, I looked into his eyes, and I saw his inner soul, and I realized this was a man I could trust. Now, that's not me saying that. That's George W. Bush saying that. So I figured, well, this man's got to know more about Russia maybe than I do. So if he's going to say that, let's put together an effort to help him and Putin bring our two nations together like Ronald Reagan suggested we should do 10 years earlier. Or actually, 10 years earlier. So I brought in the State Department. I said, give me a list of all the nonprofits that exist between the Russian people and the American people in healthcare, education, the environment, energy. And the State Department said to me, well, Congressman, we don't have such a list. Can you believe that? Our State Department said we don't have such a list. So I had to assemble a team of 40 of the top think tanks and activist groups based in Washington and this country that work these issues, like Doctors Without Borders and the environmental group, Sister City programs. They met, they developed a 48-page document called New Time, New Beginning with 108 recommendations in 12 areas. They produced this document for me, and these are very respected. Sven Kramer was one of those people. Harvard University, the Monterey Institute, plus all of these nonprofits. And it wasn't for more government programs. It was assessing what they were doing in healthcare, in education, in the environment, in energy, in security, in local government. And the goal was to take what they're doing and see how we could build on that using the new leadership of Putin and Bush. So when they finished, they brought it to me, said, you asked for this? Here it is, Congressman. I still have a copy of it if you want to show it to your listeners. So I said, you know what? This is not my document. This has got to be from the Congress. So I went over to the Senate the week before Bush and Putin met, and I was targeting 3 senators to co-sign it with me to show that it was bipartisan. So I targeted 3 senators. So when you get the document and read it, you'll see the front page letter is signed by Carl Levin, Chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Dick Lugar, top Republican on Foreign Affairs, and Joe Biden, Chairman of the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee. They all signed that document with me. On the inside, 200 members of Congress, from Bernie Sanders to our conservatives on the right, all signed a document saying it's time for a new relationship. So the Congress was ready, both parties, ready to implement a new relationship. The Russian Duma took that document, published it in Russian, and they passed unanimously. I was asked to go over to Moscow, give a speech before the Academy of Sciences. I spoke. All the top hardliners were there from the Communist Party. Zyuganov was there. And they asked me questions, and I answered them. When I finished, the Academy of Sciences unanimously adopted the document also. So we had the Russian side, the American side, all the leaders saying, let's support Bush and Putin on a new relationship. The problem was the people around Bush, they would not support him, and he had no clue. They undermined him. They disagreed with him. And over time, they won the battle. And that's the problem we have in America, that we think our leaders call the shots when, as I witnessed myself, that's not always the case. And the people behind the scenes, especially in our intelligence agencies, they can do what they want to do. And then we pay the results of their actions. And that's why today, Russia and the U.S. are facing, hopefully not a situation, but a very difficult situation for Donald Trump to try to rebuild all that. I'll give you 2 other stories that will blow your people away. We were very concerned about the Russians helping Iran with their nuclear program, the Bushehr nuclear reactor. I was very concerned about that. So I took delegations of American members over to Moscow to meet with their Ministry of Atomic Energy. The head of that Ministry of Atomic Energy was a guy named Mikhailov. And he was a tough guy. And I have a photo, which I can send you. 2 of the current senators in the House, Roger Wicker and Lindsey Graham, were with me as House members. I led the delegation. I'll show you the photograph. As I approached the Minister of Atomic Energy and demanded that they stop supplying Iran with nuclear material. In the 90s, Romanov said, Mikhailov said, we're already moving with this. We're not going to back off. I then went to the Nuclear Institute in Russia, which is called Kurchatov, headed by Dr. Yevgeny Velikov, a very good man who just died in December. I said, Yevgeny, you cannot do this. This is going to come back to bite you and us in the rear end. We cannot give Iran a nuclear weapon. He said, Kurt, I agree with you, but, this is going on with our Ministry of Atomic. I said, you've got to stop it. When Bush came into office, Yevgeny Velikov came to my office, and he said, Kurt, I've talked to Putin. And he's authorized me to tell you he will offer a bilateral to the Bush administration, a 50-50 bilateral that will oversee any fissile material going into Iran. I almost fell off my chair. Here was Russia giving us a veto over nuclear fissile material. Going back, 25 years ago? No, 20 years ago, with Bush in power. And we turned him down.
Can you explain
Yevgeny Velikov's interview is in my archives.
Can you explain to our audience why these people, what their end game is? What is their goal? Do they want war? What is their goal?
You know, I've been trying to figure that out my whole life, and I don't know what their goal is. I don't even know if they have a goal. I know a lot of them made a ton of money, and they belong to all these big think tanks that they think that they really have all the world's problems solved. And in the end, more young American kids die, more conflicts arise, and more crises occur. That's unacceptable. Let me give you a second example that I've not talked about publicly. One of my biggest concerns all during my time in Congress, and you're talking about this on your show, is proliferation. Russia, first of all, the Soviet Union and Russia selling weapons of weapons, very hostile weapons to our enemies, countries that we don't like and that oftentimes hurt our troops and our people. I'm a very avid and aggressive person in support of arms control agreements to stop that, and I was all during my career in Congress. So I frequently embarrassed the Soviets when they sold technology to our enemies. When Putin tried to reach out to Bush, and I explained that to you, and he wasn't getting traction, he tried some other ways to try to see if he could change that. So he sent to my office a person who was his closest friend, Sergei Chemyshev. Sergei Chemyshev was the head of the KGB when Putin worked for the KGB. When Putin became the head of the country, Chemyshev left the KGB, which was then the FSB, and Putin appointed him to become the head of what's called Rostechnology, the manufacturing arm for all Russia manufacturing. I met him because I was in Moscow with a delegation after Putin was put in office when he appointed Chemyshev to be this head of all manufacturing in Russia, both military and non-military. And Chemyshev was getting health care treatment in the U.S. Someone told me that, and that person that told me said in either 2003 or 4, Chemyshev would like to meet with you, Congressman, and knows who you are and knows the respect that Putin and others have for you. I said, well, what's he want to meet with me for? I don't know. I said, all right, Tomnik. So he came into my Rayburn office. The former head of the KGB, Putin's close friend, just down in my office. I said, well, General, it's nice to meet you. What can I do for you? He said, Congressman Weldon, President Putin is well aware of your concern for the sale of our weapons to your enemies. I said, absolutely, General. It's unacceptable. It's been unacceptable since the days of the Soviet Union. He said, okay. He said, I'm here on a semi-official visit on behalf of President Putin. I said, well, why are you coming to me? Why aren't you at the State Department? This is what he said to me. Putin doesn't trust our foreign ministry, and he doesn't trust your State Department. So Putin asked me to come and meet with you. I said, well, what do you want from me? He said, Putin wants me to offer to your government a bilateral, 50-50. Since I'm in charge of all manufacturing in Russia, Putin will allow me to oversee an equal relationship with whoever you pick in the U.S. Anytime one of your enemies tries to buy weapons from us, we will consult with the U.S. first.
Wow.
I almost fell off my chair. Here was our arch enemy under Ronald Reagan that sold weapons, now telling us they're willing to give us a veto power, not just over the nuclear material for Iran, but also over weapon sales to our enemies. I said, what do you want me to do? He said, I want you to set up 3 meetings. I said, with who? He said, the White House, the State Department, and the Pentagon. I set the meetings up in the Pentagon and the State Department. The CIA called my office and told my staff, tell your boss not to go to the meetings. I said, you tell the CIA where to go. I went to the meetings with Chemyshev. I sat there and I listened. What I'm telling you, he told them. Then it came time to go to the White House. I called Steve Hadley, one of the 51 people that was on that list that lied about Trump. I said, he was Condi Rice's top deputy. I said, Steve, I said, I've got Chemyshev here in America. He wants to come meet you, and he wants to make an offer. And this offer is amazing. He said, Congressman, you know who he is. I can't have that man come to the White House. I said, well, Steve, I said, George Bush, the father, was the former head of the CIA. I said, when you hear what this guy wants to offer, it's an amazing opportunity. He said, well, I can't meet him in the White House. I said, I'll tell you what, Congressman. You tell him I'll meet him in the basement of the Hay Adams Hotel. That's across the street from the White House. There's a bar in the basement. Tell him I'll meet him in the bar. And I'll take a polygraph on all this, by the way.
Wow.
I'll take a polygraph on all this. So I set the meeting up for Chemyshev in the basement bar of the Hay Adams Hotel. I'm in the car with my staff driving down to the Hay Adams Hotel. And my other staff member calls me and said, the White House just called and they canceled the meeting. No reason. Now I've got Chemyshev in my car, Putin's closest friend, who's offering this to us. I had to make up a lie and say that there's a big problem that's occurred in the White House and they had to cancel the meeting at the last minute. Chemyshev knew what was going on. So the meeting never happened. Chemyshev left America. Now listen carefully. 3 or 4 months later, one of the companies under Chemyshev sold weapons to one of our enemies. We impose sanctions. I support that. You sell weapons to our enemies, we're going to impose sanctions. Until Boeing needs titanium. Boeing hires one of our former top officials. I won't give the person's name on your show, but they pay him mega dollars. The sanctions go away, and Boeing does a deal for titanium worth more than $2 billion with a company called Avisma under Chemushev's control. The sanctions disappear. That's the problem that America's had with Russia. If you're going to be consistent, you be consistent. If you're not going to be consistent, don't expect anyone to respect you. Again, I'll take a polygraph on everything I tell you.
Oh, what amazing. Congressman, why do you think Putin was reaching out with his best friend to you? What was he? Was he trying to avoid war?
Yeah. Putin, when he went in, that's why he went to the Republican. These people go to the Republican convention. He wanted to change the dynamic. He wanted, and look, I listened to Bush. That's not me saying this. It was George W. Bush who said to the public, you can pull up his video of him saying this. Famous speech. I looked in his eyes and I saw his inner soul. And I realized this is a man I could trust. I didn't say that. George W. Bush said that. So I figured if he knows more than I do, but the people around George W. Bush didn't believe that. Whether they didn't want to believe it or they didn't care, or whether they just ignored him. We could have had a much different relationship with Russia. And I think maybe George Bush wanted that. But people around George Bush didn't want that. Dick Cheney didn't want that. Condi Rice didn't want that. Donald Rumsfeld didn't want that. And others didn't want that.
Is this because, now again, I don't know, I can only guess, but is this because they make money from war, military industrial complex? Is it because this keeps the price of oil higher and a lot of these guys are making money on oil? Why do they want the conflict?
I can't speculate. And what I told Tucker, and I'll tell you on your show, I will only testify to what I can say under oath. What I told you, I'll take an oath. I'll name names. I know the names of the people that benefited from this, who made millions of dollars. And look, nobody did more to help Boeing than me. When I was in Congress, it was Dick Cheney who canceled the V-22 Osprey for the Marine Corps. And Al Gray, who was the commandant of the Marine Corps, came into my office and he closed the door and he said, Congressman, can I talk to you privately? I said, sure. He was a friend of Bob Habel. Bob Habel, I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania called Marcus Hook. Bob Habel was a 2-star Marine, and General Gray knew Bob Habel, and Bob Habel had told Al Gray, you can trust Congressman Weldon. His family, we know, the 9 kids are good people. So Al Gray said to me, I need your help. I said, what's up? He said, Dick Cheney just canceled our #1 program, the V-22 Osprey. I said, yeah, I saw that. He said, Congressman, the Marines need that aircraft. If we're going to be able to do the deep penetration over the horizon that we're required to do, be on the tip of the spear, we've got to have that capability. It was being built by Boeing and Bell. I said, what do you want me to do? He said, well, you're on the Armed Services Committee. I was a second-term member. I said, okay. He said, well, you take the lead. I took the lead to defeat Dick Cheney on the V-22 Osprey. When I take a battle on, I don't lose. The only war I lost is when they upended my election illegally and wrongly. I put together a bipartisan coalition. Pete Guerin from Texas was my co-chair. It took us 5 years. We beat Dick Cheney. We gave him his biggest humiliation in his public life. We restored the V-22 fully. Boeing has built over 600 of those aircraft It's now the workhorse for the Marine Corps. We did that because that's what the Marines wanted. In fact, when General Jim Jones, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, was ready to fly the first V-22 and deliver it to the Pentagon, he called me and he said, Congressman Weldon, will you fly with me in the first V-22 as I deliver it to the Pentagon? I flew with Jim Jones, a man who I totally respect, to deliver the first V-22 to the Pentagon. Jim Jones went on to become the head of European Command. He went on to become the National Security Advisor under Obama. Jim Jones is not a Democrat. He's a patriotic American. I encouraged him to continue to seek running for office, but he told me that he was too old for that. But he's a great man. But the point is, I don't know why these people make decisions. I know they make a lot of money, and that seems to drive them. What bothers me is when American lives lost. I sat through too many meetings on the Armed Services Committee where people would talk about acceptable casualties. The same thing with firefighters. There are no acceptable casualties. I have 8 brothers and sisters. They served in every branch of the military. None of them were acceptable casualties. I wanted to go in the military. My eyesight, I got a nomination in the Air Force Academy, but they wouldn't give me a waiver for my eyes. I have bad eyes. I don't have sight in my one eye. So I devoted my life to firefighters. My brothers and sisters' husbands all served in our military. There is no acceptable casualty. We can't let some pencil-pushing person who never served the country in harm's way, who never wore a uniform, determine when to send our troops into combat. When that happens, our country loses focus. And that's what we did. And many of those people were under George Bush, made decisions deploying our troops who never served a day in their life, be it man or woman. They don't know what it's like to be in combat. They don't know what it's like to have a family that doesn't bring their loved one home. And that disgusts me to no end.
Wow, indeed it should. I want to switch to Islam real quick, but I did find that clip. Logan, let me play this clip. Here, I think this is at the Crawford Ranch in Texas with President Bush. Here we go.
I looked the man in the eye. I found him to be very straightforward and trustworthy. We had a very good dialogue. I was able to get a sense of his soul. He's a man deeply committed to his country and the best interests of his country. And I appreciated so very much the frank dialogue.
Wow.
You understand? I haven't seen that clip in probably 20 years.
Wow.
Did I quote it properly?
Yep, you absolutely did.
So Bush said that to us in the Congress, and we took his word. But the problem was the people around Bush didn't care what he said. The complete opposite. I was on Air Force
Was Bush
One.
ever in charge of his administration, Congressman?
I was on Air Force One on one trip with Bush. He called me up to the Oval Office on Air Force One. He said, all right, Curt, tell me about Russia. I said, Mr. President, you're losing Putin. He said, what do you mean? I said, you're not giving him anything, and he wins. I said, the guy's a spy who became a politician and the head of his country. You know, he's not a politician. I said, give him something that he can brag about, because those hardliners back in Moscow were telling him he's a fool, that eventually America would spit in his face. I said, give him something. He said, well, all right, give me an example. I said, okay, Mr. President, I'll give you an example. I said, give him Jackson Vanik. Jackson Vanik was a trade restriction imposed by the Congress when the Soviet Union was in place and they were persecuting Soviet Jews. Now, whenever I would go to the Soviet Union, before it became Russia, I would go sit in the homes of refuseniks to point out that they were being persecuted. And I worked closely with the National Council of Soviet Jews. So I supported the effort, and I was recognized for my work in support of Soviet Jews. When the Soviet Union broke apart, that ended. Many of the Jews became oligarchs. Many of them controlled the country and the wealth. So Jackson Vanik was no longer, Jackson Vanik required the president to certify each year that the Soviet Union was making progress in its treatment of Jews. Well, when the Soviet Union broke apart, we removed Jackson Vanik from 13 of the 15 republics. We did not remove Jackson Vanik from Ukraine or Russia. So I said to Mr. President, give him Jackson Vanik. I work with all the Jewish groups. They all support that because it's no longer relevant. That'll be a good thing he can take credit for, and it doesn't impact us. It's not effective anymore. He said, well, wait a minute, Congressman. I agree with you. I support elevating Russia and Ukraine out of Jackson Vanik. He said, but you know what? That's your job. You have to pass the legislation at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. I can't do it on my own. You pass the legislation and I'll sign it. I said, Mr. President, can I be candid with you? He said, absolutely. I said, well, I sit on the steering committee for the Republican Party. Excuse me. I represent 5 states for the Republicans in the Mid-Atlantic region. So when we vote on committee chairs, I get to vote for those 5 states. When Bill Thomas, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, came in for us to reappoint him chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, I asked him the question, Bill, if we support you, will you pass Russia and Ukraine out of Jackson-Vanik? And Mr. President, Bill Thomas said, of course I will. I've been in favor of that since the Soviet Union broke apart. I said, well, then why haven't you done it? And Mr. President, Bill Thomas said, because Condoleezza Rice told me not to do it. The president said, what? He said, you mean Condi's been blocking Jackson? I said, yes, Mr. President, that's what I mean. And I'll take a polygraph. I'll take a polygraph. He picks up the phone on Air Force One, and he says, get me Condi on the phone. She wasn't available. That was the problem with Bush. He wasn't in control. The people determining our policies toward Russia were undermining what I think George Bush would like to have accomplished. I couldn't control them, but we in the Congress heard what he said. We listened to him. We did all we could, but the people behind the scenes made the moves that put us where we are today.
Does President Trump have to be worried about that same thing going on in his administration?
He has to be worried about the people behind the scene. Trump took the first move by removing the security clearances of the 51 people, and that was an important move. But as I've said publicly, there are many more beyond those 51. And I want to make this point very clearly. There are good people that work for our intelligence agencies, and many are my friends. Many of them, like Peter Pry and John Quirk and Jim Woolsey, I've worked with throughout my career. Jim Woolsey endorsed my book when I took on the CIA over Iran.
Former CIA director, just to remind everybody.
Right. When I wrote my book about Iran in 2005, Jim Woolsey endorsed my book with a 3-page letter. So did Jack Caravelli, who was Al Gore's CIA advisor. I'm not against intelligence agency. We need a strong intelligence agency. We need an intelligence agency with good people. But there are scumbags in the agency. What President Trump should do, he should ask the former intelligence people to give us a listing of your assets right now. We want to put out how much money the presidents have all made. Well, how much money have our former CIA directors all made? Not just directors, top leaders. No one knows that. No one knows the involvement that they still have around the world. What involvement does the CIA have in Ukraine right now? In the Middle East? In Africa? Trump needs to ask those questions. And again, I'm a strong supporter of intelligence. But what I would say to you is, as I saw with Bush, I know what he wanted to do. The Congress knew his intentions. Everything we did under Bush was bipartisan. We had overwhelming majorities. That document that I just told you about, which I can send to anyone, was supported by more than half of the Congress and all the Russian Duma. We did the same thing for Ukraine. And yet here we are, with Ukraine and Russia killing tens of thousands of people. It's absolutely outrageous. It's wrong. It's got to stop.
And I would like to know, in addition to the CIA being involved in those countries and those things you asked about, which is, I agree, I'd like to go to the letter by Congressman Bill Posey, I think from December of 2020, when he sent a letter to the CIA director and Gina and to the CIA Inspector General, saying there needs to be an investigation to see if there's any connection between the CIA and the voting machine companies. I'd like to see that one too. I'd like to find out, are we really running elections like we should? I know that this was something Senator Jesse Howse was worried about back in the early 80s. I've got the Washington Times article from, I think, May of 83, where he's accusing the CIA of fooling around in Latin America, South America, and flipping things down there. I'd like to know if we're still running free and fair elections in this country.
Well, I don't have any first-hand information about those stories, but I can tell you that what bothers me the most is elected officials are held accountable. If they do something wrong, they're going to either be embarrassed, they'll be taken out of office, or they'll be indicted. I mean, you saw Bob Menendez go to jail. Other members have gone to jail. People in the intelligence agencies get away with nothing. We don't even know who they are. We don't know who's making the decisions, and they benefit. That's wrong.
I agree. Let me switch to Islam.
It's got to change.
You tried warning that the 9/11 attack was going to happen. Am I correct? I mean, you kind of said, look, guys, we got some signs here we need to pay attention to. Is that correct?
Well, Able Danger, which the 9/11 Commission totally ignored and covered up, actually gave us the information that Louis Freeh said could have prevented 9/11 from happening. And the Able Danger, they're all going to come out now and testify. I've got 5 of them.
Wow.
I was Able Danger. Able Danger was a top secret Army intelligence program established by General Hugh Shelton, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The program was designed to gather actionable intelligence against al-Qaeda in the 1990s. Because I was funding them, I would go down to Fort Belvoir, and I didn't get right into the program. I didn't need to, but I knew they were using new software like Starlight and Spires, and they were doing things that would be very important for us to prevent another terrorist attack. I had been up at the 93 World Trade Center attack with the Fire Department of New York, and that's where I met Ray Downey, my friend. We made the recommendation in the Gilmore Commission. I wrote the legislation for the Gilmore Commission before 9/11 to have a fusion center of intelligence. November the 4th of 1999, in my office, I had the Deputy Secretary of Defense appointed by Clinton, John Hamre, and I had the Deputy Director of the FBI and Deputy Director of the CIA in my office. And I presented them a proposal that John Hamre supported to create a national fusion center of our 33 classified systems. We called it the NOAA, National Operation Analysis Hub, policymaker and warfighters tool to deal with emerging transnational terrorist threats. John Hamre said, there were 4 of us in the room, it's a great idea, we need it, I'll manage it. I said, I'm Vice Chairman of the Defense Committee, Oversight Chairman for Research, I'll fund it. FBI said, we need it, we'll support it. CIA said, we don't want it, we're not supporting it. We didn't put it in place. 9/11 happens, I get frantic calls from the Able Danger team. 4 different people call me. They want to see me on 9/11. I said, we're under attack. Then we have to see you right away, Mr. Chairman. They came to my office in the Rayburn building separately. One of them brought me charts. They rolled out the charts on my table. They had identified every al-Qaeda cell in the world, including the 5 key cells, one of which was in New York, that identified the terrorists a year before the attack. They told me they tried to transfer the information to the Justice Department 3 times. They have the name of the person that the meetings were set up with. The meetings were all canceled at the last minute. Why? That needs to be examined. That was not examined by the 9/11 Commission. None of this is in the 9/11 Commission. None of it. The 9/11 Commission is a cover-up. Total cover-up. That's why there needs to be a new presidential commission, which is my #1 priority right now. Not of hacks put in by politicians or parties. People that have integrity, impeccable ability, appointed by the president to examine all the facts that are relevant and new information that's come out since then. The Able Danger team now is ready to come out publicly. 5 of them.
Wow.
And they're going to speak, and they're going to tell what they knew. And also, the acting inspector general at the time, John Crane, filed a whistleblower protection because he was told to lie to the Congress. I did special orders on all this back in 2005. I outlined every bit of it. And the American people need to understand that's the problem we have that's not being addressed. And that's why, and I'm not a political person, I've never met Donald Trump. So people can't say you're just a Trumper. No, I have never met the man. But we need the leadership that Donald Trump is providing right now. It's not concerned about making money for himself. It's concerned about getting our country back in order and accountable to the people of America.
Let me play a clip from you. This is a clip of you on Capitol Hill, November 9th, 2005. Listen to this, folks.
I'm Congressman Curt Weldon. Thanks for coming out today. Reluctantly, I stand to provide further information on the Able Danger situation. When I first started this effort back in June, when the full Able Danger story came to my attention, I said it could be anything from gross incompetence to a cover-up bigger than Watergate. I today will tell you, after months of looking at this issue, that there's a cover-up that's taken place and continues to take place, and therefore I'm asking for a criminal investigation as of this date. I just finished an hour-and-a-half meeting with the Inspector General at the Department of Defense, 4 employees, went into extensive briefings, and they advised me there had been 2 other requests besides mine of their office, including a request from the Senate and other request from the House. So there are 3 separate requests for an IG investigation, specifically on able danger and the deliberate persecution, intimidation, and the ruining of Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer's career. It is absolutely outrageous at what's occurred, because an Army Lieutenant Colonel, Bronze Star recipient, has been punished and had his career ruined for telling the truth. The reason why the Defense Intelligence Agency is so aggressively after Tony Schaefer is because, in telling the truth, he's going to embarrass bureaucrats within the defense intelligence community. He's going to embarrass politicians in the previous administration and perhaps some in this administration. He's going to lay out a story that will be corroborated by at least 5 others that will detail the fact that the Unit Able Danger identified Muhammad Atta and 3 other terrorists in January of 2000. The story will corroborate that in September of 2000, on 3 separate occasions, attempts were made to transfer information about the Brooklyn cell of al-Qaeda, including Muhammad Atta and 3 others, to the FBI. On all 3 occasions, lawyers within the Defense Department stopped the meetings from occurring. Those meetings have been corroborated by an FBI employee still working for the agency, who has in fact given sworn statements to the Senate Judiciary Committee. She also knew the purpose of those meetings. And then we had the 9/11 situation, where Muhammad Atta was in fact clearly identified before 9/11 as a part of the Brooklyn cell. And I now can tell you publicly that the 9/11 Commission has done nothing but hide this information. They have been unwilling to come forward to investigate. I sent the 9/11 Commission a letter dated, I sent the 9/11 Commission a letter dated August 10th to the 2 co-chairmen and all members copied. That's August the 10th. No response to this letter has come, and today is November the 9th. Now, when I questioned Lee Hamilton in a hearing yesterday, he said, well, Congressman, we're very busy. Well, they had time to send me a congratulatory letter for my work on interoperable communications. That came about a month ago. They had time for Slade Gordon to send a 5-page letter to the 9/11 Commission dated September 20th, which, by the way, they did not copy me on. So they had time to do all this, but no time to answer the initial allegations 1 week after the story first surfaced, and on 3 different days in that first week, they changed their response 3 different times. You can check the New York Times stories each day, and you can check their response. It changed each day. There's a cover-up here. It is clear. It is unequivocal.
Wow. Congressman, remember that day?
Well, it's what I mean, how many years ago was that? What year was that?
That was November 9th, 2005.
Yeah, people saying, well, someone's coming out now making the case. No. I said this in 2005 as the vice chairman of the Defense Committee, which is why in 2006, the Bush administration, in cooperation with the agency and the deep state, had to stop me from chairing the committee, because they knew I would have done hearings. They knew I would have had unlimited subpoena power. They knew I would have had people in. Now I'm bringing all that out. They might kill me, and that's a possibility. But if they kill me, everyone will know why. And I hope if they do that, that we get 100,000 firefighters that surround the Capitol, as I did when I fought for interoperable communications, because I'm not going to stop. I'm a firefighter. Firefighters don't back down, and the scumbags in Washington aren't going to do that. Now, they might kill me some slow way. And to be honest with you, I think Peter Pry and John Quirk both were hit with some kind of a slow-moving cancer that affected them. I don't think they died naturally. That's my opinion, because Peter wrote the book in 2005, and John Quirk was threatened by a guy that was one of the 3 candidates to be the head of the CIA a year before he died. And I'm not making those claims out of the blue. I'm concerned, but I'm more concerned about the country than I'm concerned about myself. This country right now is not in control, and Donald Trump is trying. The mainstream media is a big problem. They're bought and controlled. I met with Cy Hirsch, the most famous investigative reporter in the country, at the request of Dennis Kucinich. 5 years ago. And I said, you have no permission to publish anything. He said, no. Dennis asked me to meet with you. I met with him. He said, Congressman, after we met for 2 hours, he said, you have one hell of a story, but it's your story. I said, that's right. He said, but I have the sources. Let me check it out. He said, can we meet again? We met 4 months later. And I have some communication from Sy. And I told him, you have permission to publish nothing, not even on deep background. When we met 4 months later, he said, I have verified every fact in detail you gave me, Congressman. Every fact in detail. So the charts that you told me about, which they deny they have, are still on the hard drive at the NSA. He said, the information you gave me, it's been verified. He said, Brannon and Clapper did not want you to chair the Armed Services Committee. They went to Mueller and asked him to do a favor and disrupt your election. So there's no doubt that there were crimes committed against you. But he said, you have to understand, that was done in the Republican administration. I said, I know that. I know that very well. You know, that's the price of doing your job. A couple of years after I left office, I was in John Sununu's office. And I will always respected the former chief of staff to the father of the president, George H.W. Bush. And John Sununu said to me in his office, you know, Congressman, you were a great member. You were respected by everybody, but you made one fundamental mistake. I said, what was that, John? He said, in this city, you're either on one rail or the other rail. And you went down the middle and took on both rails. And I said, well, with all due respect, John, I didn't pledge allegiance to the Republican Party. I pledged allegiance to the Constitution. You guys were ecstatic when I took on Clinton. When I showed Sandy Berger to be a scumbag and a traitor who should have been tried for his traitorous acts, dealing with China and stealing the 9/11 documents. 11 felonies got pled down to one misdemeanor. I said, but you didn't like me doing the same thing when I found out about 9/11. He said, well, that's why you're not here. I said, you know what, John? So be it. Life continues.
And now we have Senator Ron Johnson saying he wants an investigation into Building 7. And you mentioned firefighters, and you are a firefighter. I mean, I know there are pardon?
I'm a lifetime firefighter. I'm wearing the jacket given to me by Ray Downey. Ray Downey's one of the most recognized heroes from the New York City Fire Department. I met Ray in '93 when I went up at the invitation of Fire Commissioner Howard Safer to visit the World Trade Center when it was attacked the first time. Ray and I began working together. Ray was a Marine, 5 kids, and Ray eventually was put on the Gilmore Commission, legislation I wrote that made recommendations, 5 reports before 9/11. Most of the 9/11 recommendations had already been made by the Gilmore Commission. One of those recommendations was a fusion center, which was not done. I just talked about that. Ray was the chief of all rescue at 9/11. He was vaporized. I felt responsible for that because I let the CIA push me back on what I knew was needed, a fusion capability that Louis Freeh, not me, said could have prevented 9/11. Now, the apologists for the the apologists for the 9/11 Commission, people like Zelikow, both say, we didn't know. They wouldn't even let me come in and testify. They wouldn't let me, as a career firefighter, fire chief, state fire instructor, someone who spent his whole life in the fire industry, who was, for 18 years, the top person for the largest insurance company in North America, INA Cigna, training all their technical people worldwide in building protection and fire protection and life safety. They wouldn't let me appear, even though I was the vice chairman of the Armed Services and Homeland Security Committee, because they didn't have enough time. They didn't want my story. They didn't want the questions I had. They didn't want any of that. And they said, well, that we don't have any proof that the Able Danger team identified Muhammad Atta. Well, let me tell you, your readers, your listeners, a book they should buy. It's called Horse Soldiers. It was written about our General Keith Lambert, who was in charge of our special forces on horseback. And the book is a New York Times bestseller. They made a movie about it. Go to page 27 of that book and read what General Keith Lambert, who I've never met, read what he says when he's asked by the author, General, what was your response? You were on horseback over in Asia. What was your response when 9/11 happened? And the general says, within seconds, I knew who had done the attack, and I knew it involved Muhammad Atta because I had been briefed on a top secret Army intelligence program. That's Able Danger. Now, what's the 9/11 Commission scumbags going to say about that? They're going to say that Keith Lambert's a liar? They didn't know about him? The whole 9/11 original report is a cover-up to protect both the Clintons and the Bushes. And I don't think George Bush himself did it. The people around him did it. General Lambert's not a liar. 9/11, the Able Danger team are not liars. And that's a problem with America. We need to have the truth, because these are American lives. 343 firefighters died. The most poignant story that I would ask your listeners to watch is a film called Bravo 7. If they can't get it, I'd ask them to contact you, and I'll give you the film, and you can send it to them for free. Or they can write to me, and I'll send it to them for free. This film wasn't produced by Hollywood, because as Cy Hirsch told me, the Hollywood crowd will never publish your story, Congressman. They're not allowed. They're not allowed to publish this kind of stuff. Cy Hirsch told me that. They'll never publish my story. The Bravo 7 film was produced by firefighters. It's an hour and a half long. It talks about not only Building 7, about all the buildings. But in the end, I urge your listeners to watch till the end. They tell the story of Battalion Chief Oreo Palmer. Oreo Palmer was a young, energetic, very fit firefighter, fire officer. Couple of kids, young wife, loved firefighting, loved rescuing people he never met, never knew, didn't care who they were, didn't care what race, what religion, gay, straight, didn't matter. He would go in any building. Oreo Palmer went into the Trade Center tower, took the elevator to the 40th floor with his crew. And his crew has their full gear on, has the air pack on. They're carrying hose, probably 40 pounds or more of equipment each. They get off the elevator and they start walking up the stair tower. In the stair tower, in the tower. Every so many floors, you hear him on the radio system call back to headquarters. I'm on floor 50. It's okay. We're going up. I'm on floor 55. It's okay. We're going up. I'm on floor 60. It's okay. We're going up. He gets to floor 78. The floor of impact of the plane. He comes out of the stair tower. And you'll hear Battalion Chief Oreo Palmer said, I'm here. We're here. We've got 2 fires. And we can handle them. 1 minute later, the whole building collapses. That's not normal.
No, it's not.
That's not real. And that's not what happened. And for Oreo Palmer and all those firefighters, I will never stop until the scumbags that did this are held accountable.
Well, the country is very fortunate to have someone with your background, your intelligence background, your years of history, knowing who these people are. I would think you are a threat to the deep state. I'll tell you a story as we wrap. I don't know if you ever knew my friend Phil Haney. Phil Haney was one of the founding members of the Department of Homeland Security. He wrote the book, See Something, Say Nothing. He was a whistleblower. And we produced his TV show here. And he told me and several other people, if I'm ever found shot, I did not kill myself. He said on the platform at Lake of the Ozarks for one of our Worldview weekends, I think that was in April of 2018. And we had with us Billy Vaughn, whose son was Aaron Vaughn, who was one of those Navy SEAL guys shot down in Afghanistan in 2011. Billy Vaughn is sitting right next to Phil Haney. And there's a platform full of guys that are part of this documentary. And I'm sitting in the middle, and I got 1,000 people in the room listening as we're filming this. And Phil Haney says, Mr. Trump, if you want to drain the swamp, you need to bring in guys like me. I can show you where the valve is. I can put your hand on the valve, but you'll have to turn it if you want to drain the swamp. He went on to detail how he had been indicted for supposedly violating the civil liberties of jihadis overseas. And he says, when I would try to stop these people from coming into the country, I would be overridden by your Brennans and Hillary types and these people, and they would delete my stuff from the system, but I put a little marker down the bottom. So when they went to delete it, it would all come right back to me and time-stamped and who was trying to delete it. And I have all these files. I have all of these files, and I've saved them. And when I heard that night, I thought, man, he's really putting it out there. And then when we post-edited the video sitting in the post-editing suite, again, I thought, wow, he is really putting it out there. He's mentioning and naming names. Well, do you know, a few years ago, about 4 years ago now, he was found shot in the chest on the side of the road, went down his chest, out his back, like he would have been a bad shot, not been able to hit his own heart, if that's what he was seeking to do. He was communicating with me and many others. He was going in for a surgery and was eager to get going on his book, hitting the trail to campaign as a private person for Donald Trump, not with his blessing or not, with his approval or anything, just as a private citizen trying to save the country. There was no suicide note. And then 2 years later, after it was turned over from the sheriff's department in California there to the FBI, remarkably, they found a suicide note, which is not in his handwriting. As one of his family members said, that's not his handwriting, Brannon. I said, I know, nor is that the way he wrote. But then remarkably, 2 years later, I have the report of the autopsy from the coroner saying homicide. But when the FBI got it and spent 2 years on it, and they finally released the report, they claimed suicide. And yet he said on the platform in that documentary, if they had let me do my job, I believe I was on the trail of the group of the terrorists to stop San Bernardino, Chattanooga, Little Rock, and all these terrorist attacks. He rattled them off. He said, if they'd let me do my job, I think I could have stopped every one of these. Does this sound familiar to you, Congressman?
I don't know the details of that, but it's really sickening to hear that from you. And, there should be a full investigation of that. And what I've done in my own case, I have the largest archives in the history of the House. And not only do I have the archives, but I have an oral history of 100 hours of digitized, annotated, indexed interviews. And there are multiple copies of those interviews with my family and with friends. They can't be erased. Those interviews are with other members of Congress, both parties. They're with agency leaders and they're with agency operatives. Those interviews are not going away. They can't be erased because people don't know where they are. In addition, I have documents that I've given, and the people that I've shared information with are people of the highest integrity. My close friend, Judge Gene Sullivan, West Point grad Army Ranger Hall of Fame, whose partners were Louis Freeh, of the FBI, and Stanley Sporkin, who was chief counsel for the CIA before he passed away. People like Buck Revell, deputy director of the FBI up until the 90s. People like Jim Woolsey. So multiple people, too numerous to mention. But, I don't want anything. I don't look at for any money. I simply want this country to be able to live to what it was when I taught school the first 7 years out of college. I taught at-risk kids in suburban Philadelphia, and I ran a Chapter 1 program to get kids to think that America was this great nation where only great things could happen. But as I got older and ran for mayor of my hometown after having been the firefighter and the fire chief, and I was the assistant fire chief on the largest fire in America in my hometown where 28 people died, and I testified before Congress. Then I was the mayor of my town and chairman of the county and then Congress. I've seen it all. But as I approach my senior years, which I'm in now, it's not the America that I taught about. It's not the system that I had kids believe that we're living in. And that's not because the system's bad. It's because we've allowed some bad actors in both parties to take control for their own benefit. There are good people in both parties. There are good people in the Congress in both parties. My best friends in Congress were all Democrats. There are good people in intelligence and the agencies. Many of them my friends. We have to get the scumbags out, the trash that hide. They hide behind their money. They hide behind their bank accounts. They boast and they create all these false stories that they care about people. They write false books. We're not stupid. And people like you have got to continue to tell this story. Now that we have the internet active, we don't rely on the mainstream media, because as Cy Hirsch told me when I met with him, he said, no producer on the mainstream media will publish any of your stories. They won't be allowed to. You can't rely on ABC, NBC, and CBS. They will not be allowed to publish anything that's critical of the kind of things I'm telling you. And even the cable news companies are reluctant now. So you've got to rely on, and Trump understands this, podcasts, the alternative media, X, and all the others to allow the people of America and the world to understand what's really going on. And again, I don't want to hurt anybody, even though they hurt my family. I don't want to hurt anybody. I simply want this country to get back to what it's supposed to be.
Wow. Congressman, thank you so much for your time tonight. I know you've had a very long day, and you've been very gracious, and you're a very brave man. Do you have a website or X account or anything where our folks can?
I'm not on X. The only thing I use is LinkedIn. I stayed away from from social media. I did put an account up on Trump's Truth Social, but I don't use it much. But you can find me there. It's at Curt Weldon. But I do mostly use LinkedIn. And if people want to reach me, it's Curt@CurtWeldon.com. And if they want, I encourage everyone to watch Bravo 7.
Absolutely.
Because you need to see the story of Oriole Palmer. He's an ordinary man, an American patriot who did what the firefighters do every day in this country. He went in to rescue people he had never met, never would ever meet in his life, of all faiths and religions and wealth. And he made it up to the 78th floor. And he's carrying all this stuff with him with his crew. And he gets off and he doesn't say it's a disaster here, it's ready to collapse. He says, I've got 2 fires and we can handle them. And the building comes down. That's not real.
No,
that's
it's not.
any firefighter knows that's not reality. And we've got to stop this. It's like what the mayor of LA did to the chief of LA Fire Department. The female chief of LA said publicly to the media, yeah, the government shortchanged us. The mayor didn't give us the resources we needed. What did the mayor do? She fired the fire chief. It wasn't the fire chief's fault. We've got to stop this. And if it's the last thing I do, I want every firefighter in America, all 2 million of you, to know you're the heroes of this country. You're the backbone of this country. That's why in every poll, 98% of the people support firefighters and EMS because they know who you are.
Absolutely.
You're the people that make America great. And next year, we celebrate the 250th anniversary of America. We celebrate the 290th anniversary of the first fire company. Ben Franklin, Philadelphia, Union Hose, 1736. 40 years older than America. Fire companies have protected our towns. And you know what? Firefighters don't go out and picket in the street. They don't go out and do demonstrations. They don't stand and block the firehouse. They don't say, we're not going to go. They go all the time. That's why I'm going to do everything I can to make sure the legacy of Ray Downey, Oriole Palmer, and all these other leaders are not forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're going to pray for your safety. And we're going to ask our audience to pray for your safety. And all I can say is thank you. And you're welcome back here anytime. You always have a platform to put out the truth here. And we just, again, I can't thank you enough, Congressman. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Congressman Curt Weldon checking in tonight. Powerful stuff. Pray for him and for his family. And again, brought to you here, uninterrupted, without one commercial. Pretty powerful, right? Pretty powerful. And there you got the truth and no commercial breaks. Please, look at what we're doing, folks. Look at what we're willing to take on, talk about that the media, you just heard him say, the mainstream media, the corporate media, they're not going to talk about this. They're not going to give me an hour and 10 minutes like you are, Brannon. We are a source of truth for you guys. And again, I want to thank all of you that are supporting us. And those of you that cannot support us, don't you worry about it. Those of you single moms, seniors on a fixed income, some that are struggling with massive health-related medical expenses, and you just can't afford to do anything. Don't you worry about it. That's why we make it free. We don't want people pushed off over the dollar figure. So we stream it for free. And we even put the programs back up online the next day at worldviewtube.com. Free, educational, and ministry related. That's what our foundation helps us do. Push out ministry and education programming where we could just put it all behind a paywall. Please go right now. Go right now, worldviewfoundation.com, worldviewfoundation.com. Please go there right now. Make a contribution. Look, again, I'm asking some of you that can do $1,000 tonight, $500, $1,000, $250. If you can do $250, do $250 tonight. $1,000, $1,000. 5,000, 10,000, whatever you can do. Some of you can do it. And you can help us raise the money tonight and be done with it for our trip to D.C., which we got to raise our normal support for the month, plus above and beyond for the special trip to D.C. with all the filming, all the interviews, all the programming we're going to be able to produce from this trip, which we'll push out for free. Worldviewfoundation.com, worldviewfoundation.com. You'll also find our mailing address there if you prefer to support us through the mail. And I want to say thank you to all of you that are already supporting us. Okay? Thank you for doing that. Don't forget, another great way to support us is by simply taking great products like Bella Grace. I take it every day. It's a great elixir with 3 powerful ingredients: collagen with the peptides cut short, astaxanthin, which crosses the brain-blood barrier that takes on antioxidants, and then Cat's Claw, which is an anti-inflammatory, 80 clinical trials. Melissa loves the skincare, absolutely loves the skincare. Get a subscription to the skincare. Get a subscription to the, for sure, to the Bella Grace. So many of you say to us over and over, I don't know what I would do without it. I don't know what I would do without it. Well, I feel the same way, because when I stopped taking it last fall for a few days when I had pneumonia, my hands started cracking and bleeding again. My symptoms are coming back from the leaky gut. Many of you say, I don't know what I'd do without it because it's fixed my problem. It's not a joke. There's 80 clinical trials behind this elixir, folks. Get a subscription and support us and your health. I think that's what you're doing. It's a big support of us. Big support. Bella Grace is a big support of us because so many of you subscribe to it. I need more of you to subscribe so we can keep growing the network, expanding the network. MelissaHouseBG.com, MelissaHouseBG.com.